For Costa Bay, Central Notre Dame, that's Clifford Small. Good morning, Cliff. You're on the air.
Good morning, Paddy. How do you hear me?
It's a bit hollow.
Bit hollow?
Yeah.
1 second. Yes, Paddy, I heard you mention wind energy in the offshore, and of course we had Bill C-49 before committee for a few weeks back in March, and we heard numerous concerns raised by fishing industry interest, even from the United States, where they've got experience now with wind energy in their ocean. And we tried to get some amendments to make sure that the fishing industry would have their voices heard and listened to, but we couldn't get those amendments through. The Liberal Party blocked every single one of them. Even amendments that were pushed by the FFAW, Unifor, were blocked and voted down by the NDP, in fact. So, Paddy, it's very concerning that we have this emerging industry very near at hand, and we don't have the proper means to address concerns that fishing industry stakeholders and, in fact, recreational boaters may have. So I just called in to let your listeners know that this is very big on my radar and on the radar of the Conservative Party to make sure that wind energy in the offshore is done properly.
Yeah, and I mean, it's hard to get out in front of this conversation because as of now, 0 applications for offshore wind. We don't know where it might be, to what magnitude or scope or scale it might be. So, of course, I think everyone would agree, regardless of which party you want to support, that doing things like that right and with the appropriate consultations has to be the process. I mean, there will be concerns with the fishery. There will be some concerns with recreational access and recreational traditional routes, but that doesn't mean that it cannot be done, because wind farms are not new. They're not new off different countries' shores, but I don't think anyone's going to argue your summary point that we got to do it right. Sure, of course.
That's right, Paddy. But what comes up continuously is that wind energy is working in other countries in the offshore, and that the fishing industry has very few concerns. But if you actually study, if you dig in, you find out that the opposition to offshore wind and fishing industry throughout Europe and down the eastern seaboard of the United States is immense. And I mentioned on your show a while back that Lloyd's of London won't insure vessels that want to navigate through wind farms. So, you know, the powers that be may say, oh, you'll be able to fish lobster, you'll be able to fish crab, you'll be able to use hook and line or gill nets or seine or whatever amongst wind farms. Now, the government may allow it, but when Lloyd's of London says you can't go within a couple of miles of a wind farm, then that's a whole different story. And it'll even affect recreational boaters, like people with sailboats and whatnot. So it's going to have vast implications for people to want to either enjoy some time recreationally or in fact make a living. And the thing is, the wind farms in the ocean predominantly want to place their structures on the banks or on the shelves in the shallower water. So the competition for the same spatial use in the ocean is going to be a huge concern, and Bill C-49 completely fails to address that.
Well, of course, the proponents, they can want what they want. Doesn't mean they get it.
Well, true enough. But, you know, when the time comes, and it will come, because Canada is the only country in the Northwest Atlantic. I guess maybe Iceland may not have them, but they're all over Europe and down the eastern seaboard. And the impact on the fishing industry has been severe. And even in terms of search and rescue, can't operate within a certain distance of a wind farm. And there were lives lost near Rhode Island a couple of years ago. The search and rescue craft couldn't even, the helicopter couldn't get close enough to rescue fishermen that were in peril. So there's a lot of concerns here, and we just can't let this happen in our fishing areas. There are areas that very little fishing takes place in, and of course that might work fine. But the thing is, wind energy proponents are going to want to put them on prime fishing ground.
And again, that doesn't mean we have to let them. Iceland, as a matter of fact, Cliff is moving towards a 10 gigawatt offshore wind farm. No, they have no turbines onshore, but moving towards 10 gigs offshore.
And Paddy, I'm sure if you did a little research, you wouldn't have to dig very far to find out that the fishing industry in Iceland is completely opposed to that. It's not the story that the public hears. You don't see the full picture. But I tell you, if you go online and you look at pictures of wind farms in the ocean, you will not see the picture of a wind farm with a fishing vessel operating in it. There are no vessels amongst those turbines, and I'm sure you've seen it yourself, and you can concur.
Of course. And as a matter of fact, we have broached this exact issue when talking about C49. We had Katie Power on from the FFAW. That's her role, and she's been involved in some of these consultations about the possibility for offshore wind. So we actually have covered this several times.
So right now the bill is in the Senate, and it's. I think there are a couple of committee meetings left in the Senate. We're hoping that our Newfoundland and Labrador senators can get some meaningful amendments, and we get it back to Parliament in a revised form, and that the concerns of the fishing industry, recreational boaters, and whatnot will be addressed in a revised form, and hopefully witnesses' testimony gets strong consideration in the Senate. So that's the last chance before then the Newfoundland government, of course, has to deal with that bill in the House of Assembly.
Sure. So very specifically, you want amendments talking about proximity of wind farms to fishing grounds, proximity of wind farms to the shore. Is that the basics of what you want to see amended?
Well, these things start out as areas of interest, AOIs. So first of all, there's an AOI. The next thing, then with respect to marine protected areas, that's how it starts out. And it'll start out the same way with wind farms, hopefully. But the experience with marine protected areas is that the fishing industry is invited to the table at the second stage, and then they're told that, oh yes, you'll be able to use hook and line, you'll be able to use lobster pots, you'll be able to fish in these areas. And then when the marine protected area is rolled out, in a lot of cases, it doesn't come out as promised, and fishing is banned in 90% of marine protected areas. So that's what we're concerned about with wind energy, and we want the fishing industry to be able to work very closely and help determine where these wind projects are going to go, and that their voices are heard. And that if they're going to place these things on prime fishing grounds, that there's a compensation formula for the loss of livelihoods that's going to take place. So hopefully some of these things will be addressed in the Senate, and that proper amendments are made. And then when it comes back to the House, the bill can get passed with amendments that ensure the viability of our fishing industry, because we've relied on it in this province for over 400 years. And it's something that's reliable. It's a green industry. It needs to remain sustainable, Paddy. It can't be jeopardized by offshore wind.
Right. And on that point, just disagree with one thing you said there, and that's compensation packages. Because if we're talking about long-term sustainability and viability, if part of the fishing grounds are lost for today's enterprise owner, that's one thing, and the compensation for that person is one thing, but then that fishing ground is compromised for the long term. So long after that fish harvester is gone, there won't be one coming behind it because of the compromised fishing ground. So I know exactly the point you're making, but if we should disallow these particular projects to be in the prime fishing grounds, then we should disallow them, period. As opposed to, okay, well, you can put your turbines there and I'll pay the shrimp harvesters on the southwest coast, because that doesn't look 10, 15, 20 years down the road at those continued shrimping grounds. Very quickly before I have to get to the news, do you prefer Cliff or Clifford?
either.
Okay. Cliff, any comments on the DFO decision to reopen a commercial cod fishery? Not sitting well with an awful lot of people here. The FFAW,
they're pretty vocal about their disdain for this decision. Your thoughts?
Paddy, the federal minister broke their promise on the 115,000 tons to have priority for the inshore. But the biggest thing about it is that now it's a commercial fishery. I agree with the FFAW that it should not have become a commercial fishery. They could have went to 25 or 30,000 tons as a stewardship fishery. There would come a point where NAFO countries would say, hey, this is a large-scale commercial fishery, in the guise of an experimental scientific fishery or whatever, and there'd be a fight on the world stage, and that's one that Canada needs to have. But to give foreigners access when there was a petition put forward, signed by nearly 4,000 Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, and folks from all across Canada, to allow a few more days of the recreational fishery, to now come in and give foreigners 950,000 tons of fish that our own folks right here can't go out, where they can't go out and at least for a certain period of the recreational season have the fishery open for every day of the week. It's completely disgusting, Paddy.
Yeah, it's certainly not sitting well. I am late for the news, but I appreciate the time, Cliff. Thanks for the call.
And one other thing there, Paddy, I'm going to be pushing for some emergency meetings at the Standing Committee for Fisheries and Oceans to address this. I don't expect much from the minister. She's very stubborn. She's been stubborn on redfish. She's been stubborn on mackerel, where we had an emergency meeting to address the closure of the mackerel fishery. And we're looking at schools of mackerel everywhere around the island now, and the large mackerel, and our fishermen are denied the opportunity to make a living from mackerel. DFO refuses to listen to people on the water, and that needs to end, and it will end under a Conservative government. That will create more opportunity for folks in our coastal regions to make a good living.
Appreciate the time this morning.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. As Cliff Small is a CPC member for Coastal Bay Central and North Sudan.